This is Mama's High on Chai. Hey Mamas, this is your host Simi with Mama's High on Chai, a podcast all about being a South Asian and being a mama. बहुत प्यार करते हैं तुमको सनम बहुत प्यार करते हैं तुमको सनम कसम चाहे ले लो कसम चाहे ले लो खुदा की कसम बहुत प्यार करते हैं तुमको सनम. Hey mamas! So I decided to open up this episode with this song and by singing away because I've been trying to do some things every day that connect me with myself. And if you've been following me on my Instagram, you've probably noticed I've been posting these TikTok videos, which I, by the way, am kind of addicted to now. But this is something that just being silly and goofy, and to make these TikTok videos public, it was really hard for me because I've always my entire life thought about what are people going to think of me? What are people going to say? How I should behave, or or even with this page, what my profile should look like. And so doing these things are sort of part of that movement that I have within myself to change that and not to care what people are going to think and just do the things that I love doing. And so, with that being said, I highly encourage you to do one thing a day that challenges you, that brings you out of your comfort zone, and that connects you with yourself as well and makes you happy. So today's episode, in regards to the good girl syndrome, it sort of just organically originated from a conversation that I had with my husband while we were just having a glass of wine, and I thought my mind, always goes there. What is the next thing that I might want to talk about in my podcast? And what I mean by the good girl syndrome is basically just the part where you conform as a girl, as a South Asian woman, you conform to the cultural norms and the societal norms and just try to impress others before you can be happy yourself. And I feel that I had that throughout my whole life. I was a people pleaser. I wanted to be a good girl for my parents, and I wanted to do the right things that they expected me to do. And I always cared about what they and others would think about me, about things that I did. And does that mean I didn't do bad things? I smoked weed. I dated. I drank alcohol. And these were the things that I believe I had in my mind, which were bad things that I shouldn't be doing, and that my parents have different expectations from me. And hence, I couldn't even talk about these things with my parents. I couldn't be open with them. And so, really, who determines what's good and what's bad? Does our culture decide that? Does our society decide that? Do our parents decide that? Or do we determine this within ourselves, in our own minds? So I was really curious about this, and I know that it has a lot to do with my own personality and my individuality, but I wanted to know if other women from my culture experience similar things with their families and when they were growing up. And I wanted to see if there was a commonality between their stories and mine, and whether we all sort of felt the same way growing up. And so they did. I asked other moms from my Instagram moms to share their stories. They sent me their stories, their clips, and I'll be playing those for you today. I think it's important because it's important to talk about this because we are raising the next generation, our daughters, our sons. And if we consciously think about how we're raising them, um, I think that they would go on to become better human beings.
Hi everyone, this is Meenakshi from Mama Untold Thoughts here in Ottawa. Thanks to Simi for reaching out to a few of us moms to get some perspectives on this concept called the good girl syndrome. Very intrigued by it, and I think it's great that we're talking about this because there's some norms that need to be broken down, some barriers that need to be broken down, and this is the best way to do it, is to talk about our respective experiences. So kudos to Simi for starting this conversation. So my take on it is I don't fit into this good girl concept whatsoever. I think my parents did their due diligence and tried very hard for me to become that good girl, but I, quote unquote, failed them in certain ways. Do they resent me for that today? No. Do they wish that things have had maybe gone more their way? Absolutely. But, at the end of the day, it's important to recognize that we, being South Asian women, and for the future generations to come, we need to stand stronger and make sure that we are living our lives the way that we want to live them, and that no one is imposing any sort of restrictions on us. So, growing up for me, I lived in a very conservative household. My parents were strict. They didn't let me, out of the house after a certain hour. Even if I was out of the house, they had to know where I was. They had to make sure it was a friend that they knew, that they had met before. Attire, I wasn't allowed to wear short shorts. I wasn't allowed to wear mini skirts, spaghetti tank tops, none of that. I was, makeup was another one. I would sometimes go to school to, this was in high school. I would leave the house with no makeup on and then go to school and find the bathroom and, quickly put some eyeliner and some lip gloss on. So those were the conditions. And, were my parents tough on me? Yes, but I think they wanted me to make sure my priorities were school, right? That I got an education. And in the end, yes, I did follow that very linear lifestyle in terms of I went to school, I got married, I had kids, but these were all a part of my plan. I had, ambitions and goals and aspirations to get an education, to find a good job, to pursue in my career, to get married and to have children. That was all a part of my plan. And so, maybe the way that it went about was not how they had hoped for it to be. They had hoped that, of course, I go into medicine or I go into engineering, but I decided to pursue business and economics. I landed a job with the government and, worked my butt off to get to where I am today. Did they wish that I had done something else? Possibly. I didn't marry a South Asian man. I, in fact, married a Caucasian man, a French Canadian. So that was an adjustment on their part. Something that I wasn't sure that they would ever accept, because growing up it was, find that good Punjabi guy who will take care of you and, give you everything you want in life. And that thought process just nauseates me, because I'm a strong-willed, determined, independent woman, and I don't appreciate anyone saying that, you're to find a man that's going to take care of you. That's wrong, very wrong. So there were certain things that didn't work in their favor, in my parents' favor, and I didn't fit those typical, societal norms of a South Asian woman. I'm very outspoken. I fun fact here, I don't cook. I'm not someone who likes to spend countless hours in the kitchen, not only feeding myself, but feeding others. And, till this day, my parents always nag me about it, because they say, how can you sustain a household if you don't know how to cook? And I said, well, my husband takes care of 90% of the cooking around here, so we're okay. We're doing okay. So there's just little things like that, and, they'll make comments from time to time, like, make sure you're serving your husband, make sure you're taking care of your children, and make sure, you're, I've heard comments too about make sure you take time off to be with your kids and to take care of your kids. And it's that notion that women are the sole responsibilities for taking care of families in that respect, right? That men go out, earn the hard earned money, and the women are supposed to hold down the fort at home and make sure everyone's happy physically, emotionally, mentally, and forgetting that they need to be taken care of themselves as well. So these are important things that need to be broken down. We need to stop. We need to stop focusing on these aspects, and we need to look at the bigger picture here, that men and women are equal. I identify as a feminist. I am a feminist, but what I'm fighting for is equality, to make sure that men and women both have an equal say in any situation, regardless of where you come from. So I think I've gone off a little here, and I've said a lot, Simi. But it's such a topic that resonates with me, and something that I've been trying to break down in my household with my parents and my family. And even now, having two girls, I am holding no expectations for them, right? They're free women. They're free little girls right now. They will be free women. They will do as their little hearts please. They will not have to answer to anyone. They are their own people, and that's the philosophy I think we need to, philosophy, ideology, whatever you want to call it, but those are the principles we need to start teaching our children from a very young age. So thank you again for bringing this up. I appreciate it, and I hope some of what I said fits with what you were looking for.
Thank you so much, Meenakshi, for sending in your story and your thoughts about this. I can relate to a lot of things that you mentioned, and I experienced similar things in my household, but I was always afraid to fail my parents. And my parents also had similar aspirations for me to choose a reputable career, and but I in my heart wanted to do something more creative. um I wanted to become a singer at one point. I wanted to, maybe when I was thinking of what to do with my life, I wanted to become maybe a fashion designer or a interior designer, but I didn't go that route. I chose what my parents expected me to do, and at the time, honestly, I did feel that it was my choice that I was making, and that this is something that I should do because this is good for me. And this is not to blame anyone, blame my parents or anything like that. I love my parents, and I feel that they did their best at the time. They knew how to, and that was it. I did marry a South Asian man, and I love my husband. He's the most wonderful husband ever. He takes up a lot of he carries a lot of weight around the house, in the domestic household chores, taking care of the kids, doing work around the house. I've never done laundry to this date on my own. And but anyways, this was something that I thought that this is the only thing that it would just be easier to find a South Asian guy who I can marry, who my parents would like. And then I didn't have to deal with a lot of stress and battle.
Hi, this is Tamina from Amaya and Us. The term good girl basically sums up my entire life. Growing up in Bangladesh, I had to abide by a ton of societal and cultural norms my whole life. I was an only child for a long time, and my parents accompanied me everywhere I went. I wasn't even allowed to walk to the next building to visit a friend by myself. I was enrolled in one of the top girls' schools in the country and was under immense pressure to be the top student every year. By grade 8, I was already starting to prep for the national standardized test that's taken after grade 10 to make sure I can score in the top percentile in the country. My parents were so strict with education and everything else that sometimes I would dream of running away from home when I was just 12 years old, just so I wouldn't have to deal with all the pressures of being a quote, good girl. Luckily, we immigrated to Canada later that year, and I finally got to experience some basic freedom, like being able to walk to school by myself or take public transit. I still remember the feeling of breathing in the fresh fall breeze as I walked home from school each day. I walked ever so slowly, taking in all the views around me and embracing the fact that I could finally walk alone somewhere. Now, looking back, coming to Canada and all the struggles we went through as new immigrants significantly shaped me as a person. A lot happened that year when we moved. My brother was born, and my parents were busy adjusting to a new life and a new baby here, which gave me so much needed freedom, and they finally stopped being involved with my every move. This gave me the freedom to manage my own schedule with school, homework, and later getting part time jobs and so on. I was no longer working hard because of fear of disappointing my parents, but because I was driven to succeed, whether it was to get straight A's in school or get a certain part time job so I could buy the clothes that I wanted or to save for traveling in the future. It all worked out in the end. I was always known as the good girl in my family, so when I fell in love with a boy from a different race and culture, it was a complete shock to everyone. Convincing my parents to approve of my marriage was the hardest thing I've had to do. They're still scarred deep down from me breaking our cultural expectations, but they've learned to accept it now, especially after having grandkids. But on a positive note, I've really paved the pathway for younger kids in my community, where many of them have gone on to marry out of culture and their parents were way more accepting than mine were. So that sort of explains some of the pressures I've had to deal with my whole life. Even as an adult, a career woman, a wife, and as a mother, I still think twice before making certain decisions because I worry about disappointing my parents. But as a mom of two girls, I'm really conscious about not pushing these rules and pressures onto them. Both of my daughters are very strong willed and independent from a very young age. So I made the conscious decision after seeing this personality in my first child that I will try my very best not to tame her spirit because I truly believe she can become a world leader one day if she puts her mind to it. Some days it's really hard raising such assertive kids, and I just wish I could tell them to do something because I said so. But that rationale doesn't work in my household, unfortunately. Over the years, I've heard many stories from friends and colleagues within the South Asian community that their in laws expect them to be good cooks and take good care of their son when they got married, and not giving a crap about the fact that their son is marrying an accomplished woman, like a chartered accountant or a lawyer, for example. I find that so discouraging to know that women are still expected to be able to do all the things their moms did and still have a career. If being a quote good girl in our culture still means being able to look after the household, then I ask all parents who are raising boys in this generation to raise them as quote good people. Because household chores is something everybody needs to learn, whether you're a boy or a girl, and it's independent of what you do for a living. I've actually started using I've actually started to avoid using the word good girl for my kids and instead say things like good person or good student or a good kid. I didn't mean to shift the conversation to gender equality now, but being the mother of two girls and having faced an enormous amount of pressure to be a good girl my whole life, I'm really interested in this conversation of what a quote good boy would be like in this generation. Is being a good boy still about being assertive, competitive, strong, bold, and so on? Or does it include being kind, caring, and emotionally intelligent also? What about being competent around the household? You see, I have a vested interest in this topic because these young boys will be the ones my girls will have to compete with in the future for equal pay and equal opportunities, as well as choose one to build a family with and hopefully share a household and where childcare responsibilities and household chores are done equally. I'm so excited to hear other mamas' perspectives on this topic. I'm currently working on launching my blog, Amaya and Us, which will have a huge focus on parenting and raising good humans.
Thank you so much, Tamina, for sending me your story and your perspective. I feel that pressure for education is something that is commonly experienced in our South Asian culture, especially in our generation. I also dreamed of living independently at some point because the fact that I wanted to be free and I didn't want to hide a lot of things from my parents and I just wanted to be myself. And I even did that for a little while until I couldn't afford it anymore. And my mom really wanted me to come back. So I did. I came back and I started living with my parents again. And I remember when I was going to get married to my husband, when I introduced him to my parents, one of the pills that was hard for my family to swallow was the age gap between us. And I remember being worried about breaking that to my parents because they had their own idea of what my husband would look like. And so it was really hard for me to convince my parents about that. And you bring up a good point there. How are we raising our boys? And are we raising our boys to be good human beings and good people? And I know that in my household, my daughter and my son are treated equally. But I also see that my daughter's personality is completely different than my son's. And, sometimes when I get upset with my children, I see my daughter sweetly listens to me and does, and I hate to say this, she does whatever is expected of her. But my son is very assertive and strong-willed, and it really makes things challenging for me. But I also almost wish that my daughter would be a bit more rebellious and make my life harder also. um and I know that, with some conscious efforts, I will allow my daughter to be free spirited and pave her own path in her life. And so this is Pearly, my Instagram mama friend, and also the host of Diatribe Podcast.
Hi, Simi. In regards to the good girl syndrome term that you created while speaking to your husband, I can totally attest to the fact that I have seen that happen firsthand more so than not. Majority of the brown women in my life absolutely made almost every decision based on the wants, needs, and expectations of their parents. And I think that's a huge aspect of our culture, that makes up a huge aspect of our culture and how we mold women into who they are. And from a personal standpoint, I noticed that from a very, very young age. And my parents were not that type necessarily to, want me to fit into the molds of a typical good girl or whatever the case is, because we come from a more liberal and open minded family, having that Malaysian influence. Not that Malaysian culture is necessarily more open minded, but we really didn't feel the impacts of the Punjabi community. And our family has always been a bit of these sort of outsiders because of that. Um, with all due love and respect to my Punjabi community and South Asian community, which I identify so much more with now. Also, because my daughter is mixed with white, black, and Indian culture. Um, I was always, and going back a little bit, I was always that person that broke the mold. And if anything, maybe it started as a bit of a rebellion unconsciously, unknowingly, in my early teenage years towards my community, to be like, hey, you know what? I may be judged by these people, but my parents know, like, I don't lie. I don't pretend to be somebody I'm not. I don't put up these fronts. I just am who I am, and I'm unapologetic about it. And I feel like maybe it came off a little bit rebellious at a younger age. And as I grew into a woman, I took it as a healing experience, and I approached it as I am who I am. I really am authentically this person. And it doesn't matter if there's these societal pressures or expectations, or if somebody wants me to be like this, or if somebody doesn't like the way that I am. I really didn't consider any of those things. I just decided that I am going to be who I am. And then transitioning into motherhood, I really wanted my daughter to have no expectations. I do place the expectation that you are going to be a good person. And a good person isn't identified by anything other than good intentions and a good heart. And that's just a testament to who she is. And I'm giving her that space to explore who she is as a person, her likes, her interests, her dislikes, how she identifies, how she dresses. None of those things determine who she is as a person. Rather, her heart does. So I'm giving her that space now. And in my case, I did a lot of healing work and continue to do that just so I can provide my daughter with a much more healthy environment and give her confidence in who she is naturally as a person. Thank you so much for bringing that topic up. I think it's going to be really interesting to hear all of my fellow brown sisters' perspectives and viewpoints, because we really learn so much from each other. And I feel like when we're sharing these conversations as a collective, we really, really learn just how to love each other more by understanding our differences. So thank you.
Hey, Pearly, I'm so proud of you to be the rebellious one, to be the one to fight those societal, the cultural pressures, and do the things that you really wanted to do and be who you really are, and not really care about others and what others think and say. For me, this podcast and this journey has been the healing one. And I'm constantly tapping into my inner self and finding my own truth and my honesty. And I'm constantly inspired by the mamas, the wonderful, supportive mamas that I'm surrounded with, to become more and more myself. And I feel that this will reflect in my motherhood, as well as it will allow me to teach my daughter to be free, and to be free of those expectations, and be herself and be able to express herself. And I love it. Thanks so much for sharing your beautiful perspective.
Hey Simi, this is Joella. I want to quickly tell you a little background about my culture. I come from a Catholic background and grew up in a Goan household where you had to marry another Catholic. Now, growing up, my parents, especially my dad, was super strict. When I moved to Canada, they changed their perspective, and so did I. My mom was very open minded to who I dated, but my dad wasn't at first. He was never confrontal, but I knew he was judgmental in the back of his mind. That quickly changed when he met Nerit, my hubby, who is Cambodian and Buddhist and has completely different cultural values than what I grew up with. Today, we are a family with two different cultural upbringings, and we practice both religions and cultures with our kids. We will give our kids full reign of what they would like to be culturally and religion based when they are older. So I think it's super important for us to, give our kids um, a way of letting them decide what they want to be when they're older, um, and not pushing it on them. I like that we do practice it at home. We practice both cultures, and I like that about our family. But I don't want them to choose based on what we practice. They can learn other cultures, learn other religions, and choose the way they feel necessary when they are older.
Hey, Joella, thanks so much for sharing your perspective on this topic. I feel that, children who uh, are raised by interracial couples might have a bit of a broader perspective on life in general, just because they're exposed to different cultures. And I'm so glad that you're teaching your children to be free and independent thinkers, and make their own choices in life. It's so interesting to hear these amazing stories from amazing mamas who were raised within our culture. Each one of these stories, each one of these perspectives were different, but they had so much commonality between them. I think what set them apart was their individualities. But that doesn't mean that they never felt burdened by the cultural pressures to be a certain way. I think that everyone consumes these pressures on a spectrum, and I definitely consumed it on a higher level of the spectrum. As time went on, I went further and further away from being myself and pleasing everyone else around me, and I jeopardized my mental health as a result. And so I want to leave you with this quote from a book that I have read. A very dear friend gave this book to me when I was going through a hard time in my life, and it's called The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Rios. And I'll add this information about this book on my Instagram page. If you guys want to check it out, feel free to do so. So here's the quote that really resonated with me, and something that relates to what we're talking about today. Human suffering begins with domestication. When we are children, other people hook our attention and teach us to dream the way the society dreams. This is how our attention is used for the first time to create the first dream of our life. Humans are creators, but our power of creation is invested in our beliefs. The power of our word, which is the same as our intent, our will, our faith, and our love, is trapped inside a rigid structure of beliefs. This leaves us with little power to change our dream. And this message is dedicated to my daughter. And I want to say to her, Zoya, don't be a good girl. Be a human. Make mistakes. Learn from them. And respect others. Have good intentions. And just be the way that you want to be. I love you, my little girl. And to my mom, I still think about some of the things that I said in this podcast, in this episode, that you might not agree with or that might hurt you. I just want you to know I still love you. And I know that you did your best. And I know that you wanted us to be good people. And to whoever is listening, I wish that as parents, as mothers, you can give your little humans that power back to break the structure of beliefs, and I wish that you're able to give them all the love and with the right intentions that they deserve to be good humans and not just good girls and good boys. Thank you. That's all for today, mamas. Make sure to follow me on Instagram and Twitter on Mamas High on Chai. I want to hear from all of you, all the mamas that are listening, and please leave me a voice message by clicking on the link at the bottom of the show notes. It'll also be available on my Twitter page. So make sure you go on there and leave me a voice message. I really want to hear from you, and send me your questions, comments, suggestions, feedback. I want to hear it all. So tune in every Tuesday for a new episode. Until then, stay high on chai and stay high on life. See ya.
This is Mama's High on Chai.